A recent investigation into a drone strike that was conducted in Kabul, Afghanistan, in the final days of the Afghanistan war, indicates that there was actually no misconduct and no negligence, even though the target was misidentified and the drone strike resulted in many civilians dying, including 10 members of one family. So the review was actually done by Air Force Lieutenant General Sami Saeed, and he found that there were breakdowns in communication and in the process of identifying and confirming the target of the bombing. But Saeed concluded that the mistaken strike happened despite prudent measures to prevent civilian deaths. Now, the claim that prudent measures were taken to prevent civilian deaths is laughable considering how many civilians died. And this drone strike was certainly political because it happened almost immediately after there was an ISIS suicide bombing at the gates of the Kabul airport. That led to, members of the U.S. military dying, but also a ton of Afghan civilians dying as well. And so it seemed like this drone strike was hastily done without the necessary, prudent measures. And so Saeed is the Inspector General of the Air Force, and he's considered an independent inspector because of the fact that he is, yes, he's in the Air Force, he's in the military, so it's kind of weird to call it independent, but they claim he's independent because he does not have anything to do with operations in Afghanistan. So already it's just like this sham investigation, and it keeps getting worse. He says this: I found that given the information they had and the analysis that they did, I understand they reached the wrong conclusion, but was it reasonable to conclude what they concluded based on what they had? It was not unreasonable. It just turned out to be incorrect. Now, what ended up happening in this drone strike? Well, I just want to note that we now have more information about the intelligence they had, right? So the intelligence was in regard to this white Toyota Corolla. They claimed that the white Toyota Corolla contained a bomb that served as an imminent threat to U.S. soldiers, right? And again, let me just remind you, there was that suicide bombing at the gate of the Kabul airport. The bombing killed 13 U.S. troops and 169 Afghans at the Kabul airport gate. And then this drone strike was incredibly devastating in retaliation. Saeed was asked, I should say, to investigate the August 29th drone strike on a white Toyota Corolla sedan, which killed Zemarai Ahmadi and 9 family members, including 7 children. Ahmadi, 37, was actually a longtime employee of an American humanitarian organization. And there were reviews of the video just before the drone strike happened, right? Video of the target. And what we're now learning is that video indicated 2 minutes prior to the drone strike that there was a child in the strike zone. So 2 minutes before the drone strike happens, video shows that there's a child in that zone. And they did the drone strike anyway. And so Saeed, who did the investigation, was asked about this, and here's his insanely callous reaction.
The physical evidence of a child was apparent at about the 2-minute point. But I'm just telling you, I put eyes on myself. I just didn't have it. I mean, they're doing it for me, but I had to see it for myself. I'm just saying, it is 100% not obvious. You have to be, like, no kidding, looking for it. But when you're looking for it, certainly after the fact, if you ask me, was there evidence of a presence? Yes, there was.
So just to be clear, 2 minutes before the launch.
Yes.
So Cale, I mean, the child was there. You could see the child in the video, but the thing is, you'd have to look for it. You'd have to look for the child in the strike zone. And even though they took all the prudent measures necessary to avoid civilian deaths, they forgot to look at the video. They'd have to look at it to make sure that there's, no children in the strike zone.
Yeah, the amount of layers of just like deception and like rationalization of like the logic of how any of this makes any sense is like so insane. Like it doesn't make any sense, because like the premise is that, well, we have to do this because it's something about security. It's It's about stopping terrorism. It's about dealing with the Taliban in an appropriate way to show that the U.S. isn't weak or something. It's like the rationalizations are all built on sand, and it's like so much so that it's like it's really mind-boggling and evil. It's like there's no other way to put this. Like it's truly just such like an evil situation where like the lieutenant general, I mean, like at some level, yes, they're making a decision. At the same time, it's like this is just like the name of the game that everyone in this situation are a part of. That like this is what you do. This is how you rationalize this. This is how you make sense of murder. And like I don't know. It's just, and of course, like of course, the way the media is treating all of this, like, has been, it's just the persistent kind of I don't know if it's resentment or just like the pushing back on the Biden administration for pulling out of Afghanistan.
Right.
And so, these things happen not because, of, American militarism, of, our actions in the region, like the fact that we're involved there at all. It's because Biden has pulled out. And so therefore things have to get more chaotic. It's, if the American presence was what it should be, then you wouldn't have these kind of horrible, callous situations. Or, I mean, the same thing too. I mean, other reports of like, there was like some recent special coverage, I forget where, on cable, about, the conditions of women in Afghanistan, being sold into, sex slavery, and like they're, reporting on these people, or like having to like sell, it's like families having to sell their daughters. And it's like, the reason why they're doing this obviously is because it's basically, the upshot is the US government and the US military should be back in this region. That all these bad
That's
things.
the only reason why they're doing it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like that's the that's the solution in the minds of, well, obviously the Pentagon due to moneyed interest, but in terms of the media just serves as stenographers for the Pentagon and the defense contractors that stand to profit from military invasions or any type of involvement of the United States abroad. And so what the United States did over 20 years was just further destabilize that country and left it in such a terrible position. And so, and then the other thing I wanted to just quickly note is the fact that, anytime you hear US lawmakers try to, generate support for a potential war or hostilities toward a specific country, the line that they typically use has to do with humanitarian rights human rights abuses, and how us getting involved is really a humanitarian issue. But the fact of the matter is, the way that we treat civilians abroad in all of these regions that we're involved in is horrendous. And it proves that the United States does not care about human rights abuses. I mean, it certainly doesn't even care about human rights abuses here within our own borders. But when you look at the way that we carry out these airstrikes, these drone strikes, with all these civilians dead, and how the Pentagon and the White House refers to those civilians as collateral damage, it just further dehumanizes individuals who are innocent, who did absolutely nothing wrong, and it shows like just how callous our government is in regard to humans, both here and abroad. And so I say that as the hostility toward China increases. You hear the kind of rhetoric that the Biden administration uses toward China, the Trump administration used toward China, and it's not a good sign. That's not to whitewash or to minimize some of the human rights abuses that do take place, right? I think that what's happening to the Uyghur Muslims is horrible, and that's not to be an apologist in any way for that, but to have the United States claim that it's concerned about human rights abuses when we're bombing and killing Muslims in countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, at what we're doing in Yemen. It's just the U.S. has no leg to stand on. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Right. Yeah. And coming out of the interview that we did a couple of weeks ago with the journalist Andrew Coburn, I mean, he makes the point, or at least a lot of his coverage has made the point that so much of the actual involvement abroad, our actual like military action, comes out of the fact that like they have this massive budget and they have all this technology, and they need to use it effectively. And it's still something, it's kind of still a puzzle to me. And I if you remember the interview, I had asked Andrew about this, and to be honest, I wasn't crazy about his answer, but I also don't think anyone has a good answer right now, which is the question of like, why is it that the military budget just keeps on going up and up and up? That it seems like the American ruling class doesn't really have that much of an interest in, you know, going into these events. Like they don't, there's very sectional, like significant but sectional parts of the ruling class that benefited from Iraq and Afghanistan, for instance. But by and large, like it wasn't, you know, like there was some redistribution upward. Part of that was through like, you know, the bonds that that the government took out from capitalists, from corporations, and so that's all true. But at the same time, it seems like it's cheaper and therefore, you know, like less expensive, and it's to the benefit of the American ruling class to just take care of these things through non-military, through economic measures, and yet the budget just keeps going up and up and up, and it doesn't really make sense. Like,
right. I mean, I think, and I don't think this is the full answer, but I think that it would be wrong or a mistake to discount how much of an impact our military spending has on the shares, like the stock value, right, of the various weapons manufacturers and private military contractors. If your portfolio is heavily invested in defense contractors, and remember, about the top 10% is overwhelmingly invested in the stock market, right? I think that alone is a pretty significant incentive to just kind of turn a blind eye to constant increased military spending year after year after year. I remember in the segment that I did about Afghanistan several weeks ago, I focused on how these defense contractors do in the stock market, how these companies perform in the stock market compared to you know, the S&P 500, compared to the rest of the stock market. And defense contractors always outperform. And so there's a huge issue with how the free market doesn't necessarily decide, right? Sometimes things can be set up or rigged in a way where actions by humans will decide like what ends up happening with the value of a significant company or defense contractor within the stock market. I think certain decisions are made specifically to benefit the value of the shares for any particular company. You see it play out over and over again. I don't know if I'm articulating that well, but
no, it's basically no. I mean, it's like war is basically just kind of like one more casino adventure for these people, and yet obviously like it has, I mean, like I was gonna say it has massive, major, horrible, you know, human effects, but most of these people's decisions do too. So I mean, they just kind of peddle in destroying the poor and you know, and sucking up as much money as they can out of us.
If you enjoyed this video from Jacobin Weekends, please hit like and subscribe. That way, you'll enjoy all of our backlog, as well as all of our future content, including interviews, live streams, and clips. Thank you.